Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us on the Fully Managed podcast. Thank you, Peter, so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it.
Great to be here.
Of course. Thank you. I appreciate that. So today we're going to start with a game, get our creative juices flowing. As a creative, I'm sure this will be a fun practice for you, I suppose. So this game is called Rebrand or Respect. So I'm going to give you a very notable brand, and you are going to tell me whether you think that they could use a rebrand. Maybe you think that what they're doing could be better, or respect, like they're on a good trend right now. You think that their brand is good the way it is, and they've been good at adapting over time. Sound good?
Okay.
All right. So first one, Levi's.
Levi's, I think great brand, and I think that they have been kind of on a rebrand arc over the last decade. And I think what they're doing is right. They're really leaning into their authenticity, but they're also realizing that their relevance is going to, depend on connecting with newer audiences as well.
Mm-hmm.
So they've broadened their remit from just, casual wear into a little bit more of a fashion forward, aspect. They do interesting collabs. I think they're on the right track.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think Levi's for the longest time a um was specifically for a very specific group of people. Like I think it was definitely men and like of a certain age, and I think because they were reliable jeans. Like they didn't wear and tear, or if they did, they aged nicely. And I think that when they kind of realized that they could be for everyone, I think that they really did very well with how they leaned into that. And I think that a lot of brands don't do that well, or just don't even consider that they could be reaching out to other groups of people. And
Yeah.
I think they did it very, very intelligently.
Yeah. No, I think the interesting part about that is that it was very difficult what they did, because when you're an iconic brand like that, it comes with a bit of stasis,
Mm-hmm.
and you have to break that. You have to create forward momentum again. And I think the way they did it without disenfranchising, I wear Levi's. I love my
Me
Levi's
too.
511. If I can find the Japanese version, they're even better. Um, but but I think I think they did a nice job of maintaining who they were, but also made that who they were more interesting to more people.
Yeah, I think that's very difficult to manage too, because it's not often that a brand taps into a new group but doesn't lose some of the old group. Because I think
Yeah.
a lot of, especially if your main group is a certain age of men, then I think that a lot of times, if you're starting to get trendy, a lot of men will drop off because they'll be like angry with the brand or whatever it may be, depending on what kind of man you are. But I think that it's the potential of that is very scary for a lot of brands too, and the way in which you do it is really important. And I think that the fact that they didn't sacrifice any of their quality or the way in which their jeans are made is a testament to, why they were able to keep their audience as well.
Indeed.
All right, well, we'll move on, because we're really getting into Levi's. Okay. The next brand is Twitter, or X, whatever you like to call it now. I always forget that it's called X. So
Wow. um, I think it definitely needs to rebrand. I think it's definitely gone off a cliff. I think it's because this is not a marketing topic anymore, right? It's become a platform for some not great things.
yes.
And I think that the the kind of the regressive quality of the platform, um, I think, is certainly something that needs to be thought about. If you're a shareholder, or if you care about the organization, um, it's really dire. I think what's happened there, and I think that um, it's become a just a vanity project for somebody. And I think that vanity projects um, are sometimes interesting to watch. Train wrecks are interesting to watch. And I think that it's been a kind of a sad loss of what I used to think was a pretty interesting platform. but now I think it's become just a kind of a bit of a, I don't know, a lint gatherer of hate and kind of odd thinking.
Yeah, I completely agree with the mentality of the platform. It almost reminds me of, and this is a very strange transition, but like it almost reminds me of Snapchat, of the idea that it Snapchat began as something that was kind of risky in comparison to other,
Yeah,
social media apps. Like the point of it was that is that
yeah,
you could hide messages and stuff like that. But I think it regressed into something so much worse that people don't even use because it has a bad taste. And unfortunately, I think Twitter or X is kind of going down a similar path of Snapchat was used probably for the purpose in which it began as for a very long time, but now it's because it kind of like fell out of favor from the group that it was specifically used for. And I think Twitter
I
and
haven't even
X,
thought about that brand in a long time.
right? Because
Yeah.
it's not relevant anymore.
No, yeah. Is it still around even? I have to even ask you.
It does still exist, but it's
Well,
not used nearly as much, I would say, as someone who had it popularized during my generation as like a teenager. It was since then the amount of people that use it like is little to none. Like if I still have the app, but I never use it, and sometimes I look through stories as if Instagram, which stories were made claim to fame through Snapchat, and I think it's
yeah,
very funny that that brand fell from fame because it had such innovative ideas that were translated into other platforms. So it's almost sad that they weren't able to update
yeah,
to
true.
for the times. Okay, we'll go to the last brand of the game since we're having good conversations about these. Okay. Um trying to figure out which one I should do. Okay, how about Patagonia?
Respect. Um, I really do. I mean, I think that their corporate ethos is very admirable. I think their business theory is something that is really, kind of, I think, emblematic of companies who put their values in in a position in a place of importance in their business, and I think that's rare. Though I think that values are really, oftentimes my job as a brand designer, a brand consultant. I do my best work when I'm able to access the values of my client and make them visible, make them realizable, as my Swiss mentor, Jörg Zinsmeyer, told me that my job was. And so I think that they represent to me a good emblem of that. And they're in front of good things like, adaptive reuse and, um, I think the way they monetize their business and support their employees, it's all good. I think it's rock on for Patagonia.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree that a brand that centers its values and actually does it authentically is one that's going to create such a loyal customer base. And I think that that's something that everyone is kind of looking for in the long run. And Patagonia is one that does it very well. It makes me very sad when a brand that is so value centered loses that, and you can kind of see it happen where
Yeah.
I think of Ben and Jerry's as a big example of um, the founders had very specific values in which they emphasized in names of their ice cream. And I think that they had a very loyal fan base, so to speak, because of the values that they had. But I think that recently their core CEO that held those values was replaced. By someone who clearly does not have the same values, and a lot of people dropped off
Yeah.
as far as I saw
I
because
mean,
of that.
I feel like, you don't have to wear your values on your sleeve as a
Yeah.
business. I think it's a helpful um, framework, though, to make decisions. And even if you don't publicize it or make it just internally, creating some guideposts for you. And so companies can express them more or less. I think having them though certainly provides a rudder for any organization. So um, yeah, it's like, I really respect Patagonia because they both wear them on their sleeves, and they make good sleeves. And I think that um, they've kind of like figured that how to do that well. Other companies I think struggle sometimes to, in a very performative way, talk
Mm,
about their values, and when push comes to shove, they're just, kind of performative, and they're really, you find that they're not authentic. They're not
mhm.
really something valuable to them. So it's interesting. It's a great topic, though. It's one of my favorite topics about the work that we do, and there's not a lot of like, easy answers in it, because the climate that we're in has really polarized
Mhm.
even the idea of having values, right?
Yeah.
It's polarizing, and I find that to be a sad development.
No, I definitely agree. It is something that's very sad, especially I think that brands like that, I feel like on your values, I think you kind of touched on this, is that with your values, you kind of develop your brand's voice. And I agree with you that you don't necessarily have to wear your values on your sleeve, but you act accordingly in as a result of your
Yeah,
like foundational values. And there are, I think, many brands that wear their values on their sleeve, and it's at a detriment to them because they don't do things that reflect what they're advertising, which is, in your place, what you said, performative. But there are ways in which you can use your core values to act towards those and not necessarily advertise them too, which I think a lot of people,
yeah,
when they're talking about that subject, kind of don't address. I think what I hear from marketers very often is to not wear your values on your sleeve, but I think there's a very specific way of doing it in which, if you do want to advertise what you believe in as a company, or like as foundationally, then you need to make sure that your actions reflect that, or you may risk losing your fan base or your
yeah.
client base.
I mean, I would also guide, show, not tell.
Mhm.
I think values really should be demonstrated and not advertised. So I think that's. I mean, it's good guidance to not just explicitly talk about it, um, but demonstrate it.
Yeah, I completely agree. That's something that I think that's I like doing that so much more than I I often hear that doing some like that saying something about how your values are as a company is at a detriment to the audience in which you can reach. And that's something that I hear very often, and I can understand that if you want to reach a wide audience, sometimes you do have to be more centered in the ways in which you think about things. But there's certain values that aren't polarizing, that I think you can have as like just being good and being.
I mean, you think that's the case, but I'm not sure that's true anymore.
I kind of understand what you're
When
saying.
when when the idea of diversity or inclusion and equity can be demonized,
Hmm.
we're in a different context. It's like those are good things.
Yeah.
Those are I believe inarguably good things. And yet the idea that there's some argument that can be made to say that they are prejudicial,
Hmm.
is really it's just so mean, and kind of, it's a power thing, and it's really, I think, probably one of the worst things in the business atmosphere right now.
Yeah, it's not looking at the full picture of, what is. Yeah, there it's not great that what is good is debatable at this point in time. I think there were many values in which um I think we're always, I guess, always debated, but it seems almost more outspoken now. That's things that a lot of people, I would hope the majority of people would agree are good, are now, I agree with you, debated over whether they are prejudicial, which is not, we're not going to get into this philosophical debate because we definitely agree on this.
I think this is a different kind of podcast.
Yeah, no, we're allowed to get into philosophy, but I think we'll save it for maybe outside conversation. Right. But I 100% agree with you. I think that this is a big problem in business, and I've talked to a lot of people who work internationally, maybe similarly to you, that notice that these values are very different in other spaces, and that something that I heard recently, which I really loved the idea of, and I was like, oh, this makes me feel so much worse about the United States and how they do business. It's we had a member on the show that works with specifically Japanese businesses very often, and he was saying how talking about having a legal team or like being in contact with a legal team is not commonplace. Like it's almost taboo to talk about a legal team because they don't have this culture of suing over very minor things, and or even like sometimes even major things. A lot of times before they sue, they'll try to reach some kind of agreement because they're not making partnerships or friendships or like any kind of correlations with companies that they think are going to burn them, and of course I don't think United States businesses do that with that in mind as well. But I just thought that was so interesting because that's like always in the back of my mind, I think, as like as interacting with a business in the United States, of like lawsuits are a big topic and something that is almost present in most spaces, and I just think that it's very interesting that that's so different in other cultures. And it's just so like there's so many things that are very different, but so we're change topics because we're talking about so Profit emphasizes a balance between art and science. One, I was wondering, how do you keep those kind of in harmony, but also which one do you think you're more akin to? Because I hear a lot of people that say they're more creative brained or they're more science brained, and I'm just curious about like how you have a balance and what you think is the easiest for you personally.
Yeah, art and science, it's trite, but it's a good shorthand
Mm-hmm.
for different types of problem solving, right? And I think that when we think about analytic problem solving, the science part, analytic problem solving, it's super useful. It's like it's foundational. It's like a great way to, like, 1+1 = 2, right? That kind of idea, The art side of it, I think, is more aptly described as synthetic thinking and synthetic problem solving, where you're using very asymmetrical kind of inputs to a problem, like whether it's numeric for analytics or some kind of the math, if you would, of analytics and science. The synthetic aspects of problem solving with color and emotion and culture, that kind of putting those ingredients together is a different kind of problem solving, where you're synthesizing solutions as opposed to kind of mathematically creating them. And so I believe that there is power in both ways. And in our marketing sense, in our marketing job sense, I think that the combination is fantastic. I think it's I work with a lot of smart consultants and insights teams and analytic teams, and some of my creative friends are like, "What do you even talk to about them?" And I said, "Well, we talk about ideas, because I believe that the foundation that kind of insight and analytics oftentimes create gives you such creative freedom, really gives you confidence in what you're doing, that I really love the idea that profit is really super strong in insights and analytics, and in strategy development, because within that, those kind of, if you call them constraints, I think they're foundational. Um, the creativity can really thrive and really elevate with confidence that you're going to be delivering toward the right effect. And it's our job. We're not artists. I don't like to talk about what we do as art. It's not about self-expression. It's problem solving for clients in ways that drive their business. And the creative aspect of that is what engages customers, and it actually creates the emotion and the behaviors that you're seeking through this work. So yeah, to me, it's an important balance. I think because it makes the work more serious, seriously impactful. It makes the work, I think, more, in a funny way, transparent. That you kind of see why things are. It creates rationale. It creates conversation. I like the blend of that kind of problem solving very much in the work I do.
Yeah, no, I like that you're framing it as problem solving, because I do believe that's what it is when you're working with clients, because there is a level, like, I mean, it depends on what you consider to be art. Is if you believe art is self-expression, then there's a different for working with a client. Sometimes you can't be as self-expressive as
Yeah,
you'd
and I
like.
don't think it's our job to be self-expressive in a
Yeah,
design challenge. And I think it can be artful. I mean, I hope
of
that
course.
some of the work I've done over these decades has been artful, and people go, "Wow, that's kind of beautiful," or have whatever reaction art sometimes creates. But it's never the intent. Never the intent
Yeah.
to create art.
I my understanding with talking to a lot of creatives on this podcast specifically is that those constraints that you're talking about, that you believe that you said you believe to be foundational, I do think that those are almost helpful in the creative process, especially if people are very artistic and self-expressive. It kind of helps narrow their focus in a way. Um, and I think that that's kind of where the problem solving aspect comes in, is that you are doing this for the specific constraint, the specific problem, and you can be creative within that. But when you're
Exactly.
able to kind of go wild and you don't have a lot of constraints, sometimes the project is harder because,
Oh, without
yeah,
constraints, it's almost impossible. You know,
you run.
um, I learned a ton looking at the work and reading the writings of Charles and Ray Eames. They're kind of heroes of mine in how they lived and worked. But one of their key principles was that the constraints of the problem drive toward the creative solution. And I think that, like, good constraints really drive you to be creative, right? What seems impossible to do is oftentimes only solvable through a creative exercise.
Hmm.
An analytic exercise would fail. And so I love the idea of constraint as input to creative um, problem solving.
Do you ever feel in, or have you ever felt in certain scenarios that sometimes there's too many constraints put on a specific project where it is creatively stifling?
Yeah, but those are usually people based.
Yeah.
They're usually people based, and they're usually opinion based constraints,
Hmm.
right? I mean, if you break down most constraints, you find that you know, the factual, the phenomenal things that you can't get around, right? But most of the time, the constraints come from someone's opinion or someone's ego, or there's always these kind of softer, though no less important and sometimes insurmountable, challenges to work.
Hmm.
Um, but it's rare. It's rare where you just can't do it. You
Yeah.
can. I mean, that's the great thing about design is that there's always a way. I think there's always a way. Oh, of course, that's just my optimism too, and because I do believe optimism is one of the key um, kind of traits of a designer. You have to be optimistic, or else why do it? You know, but
Yeah.
but but so I think that I don't think I've ever come to a problem there were so many constraints you couldn't do it. I think I've come to problems that are so hard, but I think the outputs have been great.
Yeah,
Harder
pressure
the
makes
harder the
diamonds.
constraints, I think sometimes the better the work.
Yeah, no, I think that optimism is really important because you truly have to believe that there is a solution to the problem. Otherwise, you're not going to get to that solution. Being
And
pessimistic.
you know what? I'm going to figure it out. You
Yeah.
know.
Yeah, it might just take a much longer time than my usual process if it's something that is very, very difficult to navigate. But I I do think that that optimism is it drives you. It drives you towards that solution, and that's something that is really important.
Yeah, for
In
sure.
within that same scenario, like have you ever had a suggestion for like a bold creative direction, like something that you think maybe was a bit considerably risky for a client or something that they believe to be risky, like, and how do you navigate a situation like that in which like you are kind of within the constraints but they're like, I don't know how I feel about this.
Yeah, no, off very, very. I mean, if you don't put yourself in those situations, you're not pushing hard enough. I
Mm-hmm.
really do. I mean, you want to walk right up to the risk. You want to walk up to the thing that makes your client uncomfortable a little bit. You know, I mean, that happens on pretty much every project. I believe in the school of options. I bring options to clients. There are some designers who don't. I just think it's a good way to help yourself understand what you're doing. Forget what the
Mm-hmm.
client, how the client picks it. It's a great process, I think. In architecture school, I had a professor, and she always insisted that we had three ideas, right? And I've kind of adopted that. You mean you have to at least have three ideas around something, and then because usually your first idea is probably pretty good. Probably oftentimes your first idea is the thing that becomes the solution, and with some modifications. But some of
Mm-hmm.
those modifications come from your second idea. Oftentimes, the second idea is something that you have to force yourself to do something very different, and you take a different angle on it, and you come up with it's still an interesting solution. Might not be as strong as the first one, but it's still pretty. You know what? And then you start falling in love with the second one, right? And the third one is usually a kind of somewhat derivative of one of the other two, right?
Mm-hmm.
And but different enough to be distinct. And when you come to when you bring that kind of thinking to a client in terms of options, you let them find their center too. You let them, it gives them some agency in the process. And I believe that clients deserve that. We have a thing at Profit that we talk about. We don't do the work to you, we do it with you. We don't do it for you, we do it with you.
Yeah, an
And
extension of the business.
all the best work that I've ever done has been with highly engaged clients. Highly
No,
engaged.
I really love the idea of having several options because I think it also kind of forces you as a creative to
It makes
think
you,
outside the box. Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
exactly.
Keep you from being lazy. I mean, it does. It's work, and I think it's a good making yourself do three is a good prompt in the gray matter of the brain. I think to actually push your ideas, think further. It's just a great, I think, just good discipline.
Yeah, of course. Like the first idea I can see would often be something that comes to your mind immediately. And sometimes
Yeah.
that's not always the best idea, it just might be the easiest idea. And it might be the best idea because, that's why it came to your mind first, but that's not always the case. And to force yourself to think more creatively and more innovatively, you have those options.
I find that the longer I've done this work, my first ideas get better and better.
Wow. So it's just like a process that you think is kind of fine tuning what you're
Well, I
thinking
mean,
of.
if you've done the problem a few times in different contexts before, you kind of know what to do. But forcing yourself to have other ideas is still a great exercise. It'll make the first idea better if indeed that's where you land. But I think that it's yeah, one of these things. Experience gives you a way to accelerate going to the right idea. So that's why I'm saying, the longer I do this, the better my first ideas are.
Yeah, no, and I think that is. I think that going through that process is almost instead of maybe thinking about that first idea in the easiest way, you might go through a more of a process to even get to your first idea after doing all of that to get to something that maybe is more creative isn't enough of the word that I'm looking for, but something that's just better than maybe what you were thinking of as your first idea, as an immediate thought.
Oh yeah, yep, that happens too.
Have you ever run into maybe like an industry, or I don't know if it's hard to generalize an industry entirely, but a project that was unbelievably difficult for you, not necessarily because of the constraints, but the nature of that job, like the very specific way in which they wanted things done?
Hmm. Yeah, I find working in CPG, in packaged goods, and you're working with really sophisticated brand management teams.
Mm.
They often have a way, their way. It's their
Mm-hmm.
way, and I think sometimes it's difficult that it it becomes like just a fill in the number, paint by numbers kind of creativity
Mm.
when CPG frameworks and things are so rigid. They have to be, because they're managing millions of projects and brands, and they need some ration to what they're doing, and to just manage it in a good way. I think that's very hard. I think that's hard work. I think it's very hard work. I have a lot of respect for people that work in that categories, and like some great designers like Mauro Puccini, and on design, and like Fernando Machado, as a consultant. They just do good thinking in, I think, a very hard business.
Yeah, to have those kind of constraints is something that must be very difficult to navigate. Is there, having had experiences with that, what is something that you think you came out of it learning?
Hmm. I think it makes you question your own process, right? Am I being rigorous enough? Or do I need to standardize my approach more often? Will it be more effective if I did that? So I think coming out of those engagements, it's a little bit of reflection of, what did I learn from that? What did I learn from the difficulty here? And um, was it necessary? Was it necessary, the difficulty necessary for what happened, or was that kind of a self-imposed rigidity around frameworks or standardized approaches that got you in trouble? So it's a mixed bag of good and bad learnings. But, it's I don't know. I don't like to fail. I mean, nobody does. I mean, I think, but when we're compensated so well, it's like failure is kind of like not an option, right?
Hmm.
You have to make it work for your clients and their markets and their businesses. And so, yeah, I'm sure I have a few back in my pack here, but you kind of, in this business, you can't fail. You have to get it to market. You have to make it work.
And so in those situations, it's something that is really something arduous to go through. I think that as a fellow optimist, I like to ask that question about some situations that are very difficult, or maybe not something you're used to, because I do think that um, everything, even if it's something that you don't love to do or navigate through, or do those projects specifically, I think that there's always like a learning moment um, in which can help you with your regular process. And
Yeah,
so I think that, to what you said, that you are kind of rethinking your process because of working in that kind of industry. And I think that that's something that is beneficial, regardless of maybe how annoying it might be to do it at the
yeah,
time. It is great to be able to get something out of it.
yeah.
So my final question for you today is, as an optimist and a future looking thinker, what advice would you give to a young creative trying a career in design, but for specifically longevity with their creations in mind?
Wow. What a time to be a young designer, right now. I really super exciting. I mean, if there was ever time to start over, it'd be right now. I think the tools at hand, and of course, I'm inferring around artificial intelligence is becoming a tool. The large language models that we have that are going to be so really disruptive to how we work. In navigating that
Totally.
space between tools and being a partner, with you, it's going to be just fascinating. So young designers are going to have a lot more on their plate in terms of expectations of speed and optionality and the iterative process. Um, but I say embrace that. So that's one advice: is embrace this emerging set of tools. It's gonna, I think, gonna be amazing what we're gonna get out of it. The other thing is, I think that transcends technology and trend and what's going on. I think that young designers need to remain curious. I think curiosity is the thing that's really kept me interested in this business. I'm always curious about the next company I'm going to work for. How do they make money? What do they do? What do they feel like? Where are their factories? Where are their offices? Who are the people that work there? Who are their customers? Right? Getting to know my clients' customers, be curious about that, has been such a rich byproduct of being a designer. So I think those are two things: embrace the emerging ways of working, become good at them, and be curious.
Yeah, well, both of those are extremely optimistic. So I appreciate that. And ending on that note, I do think that um it's very hard in this space to be worried about the rise of AI and what ways it can impact our work. But I do think that embracing it is kind of the only way that you can at this point, because it's clearly going to be heavily incorporated in our way of life, and kind of already is in certain ways. And as a creative, I think sometimes it can be seen as a threat, but I think that at this point in time, at least, it can be used as a partner. It can be used as something to enhance your work and not, make, you know, make you not be creative anymore. I think that if anything, it gives you the opportunity to be more creative because it can do tedious parts of your process that may make it harder
Crazy, yeah.
for you.
It really is going to be, I hope, an unlock and an unleash of more creativity, where it used to be sometimes our ability to visualize something quickly has been pretty primitive and maybe held us back. But now we can visualize entire worlds and entire ideas fleshed out beyond such great fidelity, um, faster. I think it's going to be really so changing. It's like when like when graphic design moved from cutting out letters and vellum and foil to computer based. Right, that's the huge shift of ways of working. In that field at that time, transformed it pretty quickly. Similarly, this is going to be touching every form of design. Every form of design is going to
Mhm.
be able to use these artificial intelligence based tools to, I think, find find new things. I'm really interesting. I saw this. Something popped up my feed about Keanu Reeves conversation with Elon Musk or something. I don't know if it was real or fake, but the
Mhm.
way it was juxtaposed, Elon talking about how the artificial intelligence robots will replace humans very quickly. It's going to coming, and then they asked Reeves about what he thought about that, and he said, "Well, I don't think the algorithms will ever know loss. Algorithms won't be able to calculate loss or ecstasy or joy." He had, he really emotionalized the inputs to creative functions.
Mhm.
I think in a very human way. And I do think that the algorithms will struggle to understand what that means and feel like, and how that translates into ideas of doing things. I think that's a particularly human quality. Years ago I read a book. Oh, what was the guy's name? I got his name. He's a futurist and was talking about the rise of robotics and and artificial intelligence. And it was so interesting. He said, yes, they will replace a lot of things that we do. Manual labor will eventually, be more robotized. A lot of, intellectual function will be handed over to machines. But he said, when we find those things that the machines can't do, we will start defining what it means to be human. And I thought that was just a great. I'm so curious about what that's going to be. Once all this stuff that machines can do starts doing them, what we're left with will be essential and human in some interesting way. I hope. I think that's just a great, like, we're not there yet, right? But down the road we'll start. Maybe those real human things will start to emerge.
No, I really appreciate that a wholesome outlook as well, because it is something that I think is the top of everyone's mind of being worried in some way about it. But I do think that humans will always be needed in so many different processes because of their emotional, output. There is so many things that are inherently human that people crave, and I think that when things even do replace humans in certain aspects, and maybe we find out that maybe they shouldn't be, that's when you kind of figure out that no, like, people do crave this connection. And I think we kind of saw that during the COVID outbreak, because I think that people realized how essential it was to communicate and connect. And I think, yeah,
Together.
yeah,
Dave
community.
Grohl, the guy from Foo Fighters, he
Hmm.
wrote a piece. I don't know, it was for the Atlantic or something. It was the Atlantic, about the sense of loss during COVID and the essential qualities of needing to gather, right? That humans need to gather.
Hmm.
It was so
Community.
beautifully expressed. You should look that up. So it's a
I
great.
will, because I love the Foo Fighters. Foo Fighters, as but this was an incredible conversation. I think a very good mix of wholesome and education, and I really do appreciate you chatting with me so late in the night for you.
I think I do my best thinking at this time of night anyway. So
You
you
did
caught me at a good
wonderfully.
time.
Yeah, very professor, very professorly.
Oh no.
So,
Oh no, that's the harshest thing anybody said to me in a long time.
oh no, I love my professors. College was my favorite part of life.
Yeah.
And for the educational part, and not for the other parts that other people like to say.
All right.
But thank you so much for everything that you've contributed to this. I think that this was an incredible conversation, and I know that our audience is going to get as much educational tools from this as I did. So thank you so much.
Well, thanks, Shannon. I enjoyed it as well.
Thank you. And thank you everyone for listening. We'd be nothing without you. I hope that you can check out other episodes and get to learn every time like I get to. Thank you so much.